Part 110. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1094. The unicorn lowered its head, and the lightning on its horns was about to move. Gretel immediately stood up. With a flick of the finger, one layer of defensive magic after another is activated instantly. Spell Invalidation Barrier, High Mage Armor, Force Field Barrier, Ray Deflection. After brushing one layer, brush another layer, and after brushing one layer, brush another layer. In the blink of an eye, he had covered himself with 4 layers of eggshells, and had a glory shield in his hand, ready to go. At the same time, the silver-white lightning kitten also jumped lightly on his shoulder and waved its paw to the opposite side. Meow. The angry unicorn lowered his head and calmed down. The unicorn's 2 main attack weapons are brutal collision and lightning control. In a one-horned collision, the opponent is a spellcaster and has already erected a barrier, so he may not be able to defeat him. And lightning? The silver-white kitten, with its violent lightning power, made him instinctively tremble at the first sight. Get out of the way. Don't damage the microscope, Gretel started to scold after finishing the defensive spell and feeling safe. While scolding, he moved in the direction of Elder Fahim. Elder, why can outsiders come in at will in my laboratory? Elder Fahim felt a little embarrassed. Emotionally speaking, Gretel is a descendant of his own race, and these unicorns are his friends, and he does not want the 2 sides to fight. Logically speaking, the mage's laboratory is the mage's own territory. Anyone who breaks in without permission deserves to be beaten to death. And Gretel chopped up the unicorn's body, so it's no wonder the other unicorns were angry. As a landlord, he can only make peace with both sides. Don't be angry, say whatever you have to say, come on, come out and speak. Opening his arms, he pushed the unicorn out of the door first, and then pulled Gretel out. As soon as he stepped out, before Gretel could speak, he raised his hand back and reinforced the mage's cabin with a layer of defense. Greet knew that he was trying to reassure her, so she smiled at him and followed him towards the group of unicorns. Still about 10 steps away from the opponent, Elder Fahim raised his hand slightly, and an invisible ripple spread quietly. Gretel relaxed his shoulders and let out a long breath. On the opposite side, the unicorns who lowered their heads angrily and pawed at each other also paused, and their tight shoulder muscles relaxed a little. This tranquility technique, used in the hands of the legendary master, is really light and has no smoke and fire. Seeing the scene calm down, Elder Fahim slowly said, Don't worry, don't worry. Where is Phyla? Have you brought her here? The 3 unicorns dispersed to the side, revealing a unicorn lying on the ground with a circle of burnt black on its shoulders. Above the charred blackness, a big ball of flesh bulged out and kept moving on its own. It was shocking to see. It no longer had the strength to stand up, and could barely breathe. When it saw Elder Fahim, it nodded slightly and shed big tears. It's okay, Elder Fahim stepped forward quickly and touched Phyla's head. The palm fell, and a misty green light came in. Under the gaze of everyone, Phyla's aura instantly became more stable. The sound of gasping came one after another. Elder Fahim stared at the charred blackness and fleshy balls on Phyla's shoulder and back, frowning slightly and making gestures constantly. One after another, gleams of light sank into Phyla's body. After a while, he asked solemnly, Did you get injured in the secret realm again? It was an injury a long time ago, the unicorn who rushed into Gretel's laboratory answered on his behalf. It was a monster that ran out of the secret realm. Phyla fought with it and killed it, but was also injured by it. At that time, everyone thought it was cured, leaving only a little scar, but who knew it was getting worse and worse. This injury is very troublesome. Elder Fahim circled the unicorn, wisps of natural breath coming in, and his brows furrowed tighter. If you had come to me earlier, maybe it could be cured. But now, the pollution aura has spread to the whole body. I can only use natural aura to protect her roots, but it can't cure that much. No matter what, please help." The leading unicorn lowered his head deeply, and the tip of his horn almost touched the ground. The other two unicorns lowered their heads at the same time, and even Phyla let out a long low cry and tried to lower her head. Elder Fahim sighed and stretched his hand to the side. Anari Ling quickly handed over the wooden stick. He held the wooden stick with both hands and chanted slowly. Lin Ji stood behind him and sang along, and even the unicorns lowered their heads and chirped in response. Only Greed was unable to intervene or offer a hand. The chanting sound rose from low to high, and for a moment, the surrounding wood leaves rustled, and countless light green light spots rose from the trunk and gathered at the top of the wooden staff. "This is to use natural breath to fight hard," Gretel sighed secretly. Light green dots of light rushed from all directions, eventually condensing into the shape of a small unicorn. The green unicorn suddenly swelled, covering Phyla and tightening inwards. Phyla screamed in pain, and there was a slight crackling sound, as if it was detonated between its flesh and blood. Although this treatment is painful, it is also very effective. A large amount of natural aura was injected into it, and the black color on Phyla's shoulders and back became visibly smaller. The sarcoma on it also shrank from the size of a cantaloupe to the size of an apple. She stood up unsteadily. Next to her, 3 unicorns came close to her, rubbing and licking her fur, looking very happy. "That's all I can do." Elder Fahim sighed tiredly. "If her condition is better, I might be able to try to remove the sarcoma on her shoulder. But now, the sarcoma is too deeply rooted, so I can only try to restrain it." Having said this, he turned to Gretel with eyes full of expectation. "Young healer, I have read the papers you wrote. You are quite accomplished in treatment, and it is in a completely different field from me. Can you help?" Maybe Gretel stood firm, met his gaze, and nodded slightly. "Of course, the premise is that they are willing to let me help." What greeted him was one long angry roar after another. Gretel turned to the unicorns with a solemn expression. "First of all, I didn't kill Nana. I got Nana's body from a knight of the glorious Holy See after I killed him. Secondly, I dissected her body not for blasphemy, but to understand the strange diseases caused by the elven secret realm. I have a clear conscience about this. Again, in the laboratory, there are many monsters that came out of the contaminated area, and I conducted dissections and studies on them one by one. The elder can testify that I did not use any evil means. Finally, Philadelphia's injuries are very similar to what I saw on Nana. If you are willing, I can try to help treat it. If you are not willing, I will not beg for help. There's a lot of research done. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of thanks. At Zhenhuayuan is the 200 starting coins I rewarded. Thanks to at Yahweh Dengxian 233 for the reward of 100 starting coins. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 1095. The neighing sounds of unicorns came and went. A long sound, a short sound, sometimes a low sound, sometimes a high pitch, plus the sound of scratching the ground, the sound of jets, and the movement of the sharp corners of the spiral swinging back and forth. Standing in front of them, I didn't have any confidence, and I felt really a little confused. Gretel stood motionless, with his shoulders straight and his eyes calm, looking at the injured unicorn opposite. He has a clear conscience when it comes to dissecting cadavers. Can he survive the first batch and cure diseases? When it comes to medical treatment, whoever begs for it? The unicorns talked for a while before becoming quiet. The leading unicorn snorted, took 2 steps, faced Gretel, and said softly, "Young healer, my name is Atef, this is Doshi and Mesa. Just now Doshi broke into your laboratory without authorization. It was his fault. I'm sorry. And, was it really not you who killed Nana? Indeed it's not. The other party's tone was soft, and Gretel didn't mind telling the matter again. I killed a knight of the glorious Holy See and found the body from his space bag. If you want to see it, I still have the knight's body with me. If you can, please. The unicorn lowered his head. Greet nodded, patted the space bag, and a body fell to the ground. The unicorns gathered around, their nostrils flaring, turning over the corpse with their horns, and neighing softly as they chatted. Gretel didn't understand the unicorn's language, so he had to stand aside bored. Turning around, Elder Fahim and Anari Ling looked very attentive, and they seemed to really understand. The elder listened for a moment, nodded to Gretel and smiled. Well, living long is really amazing, you can understand everything. Before Greet could finish her curse, the unicorn Atef had already raised his head. The current on the spiral horn faded, and dark blue eyes looked at Gretel with gentle eyes. He is indeed a knight of the glorious Holy See. In him, we feel the resentment of our compatriots and also feel your aura. Young healer, thank you for avenging Nana. Well, revenge can't be called, Gretel laughed and shook his hand. Atef continued. We unicorns don't do things the same way as you do. We follow different laws. Maybe you chopped up, in your words, dissected, Nana's body for reasons you thought were necessary. We don't quite understood. But he turned his head, looked at Phyla tenderly, and blew out a stream of white air from his nostrils. Compared with the dead, the living are always the most important. Young healer, I would like to know if your anatomy behavior might help you treat Phyla. Maybe there will be, I'm not sure. Gretel nodded to him seriously. But I did detect some abnormal signs from Nana's body, which may be helpful for treatment. Then please help. Atef bowed his knees seriously. He raised his head and looked at him. The polluted area is getting larger and larger. In the forest, no new unicorns have been born in 20 years. Every tribe member is very precious. Young healer, please help Phyla, even if it can alleviate it a little. With his words, Gretel was willing to roll up his sleeves and help. He first performed a B ultrasound on Phyla. Elder Fahim, who had a paper and an imaging atlas, stood by and followed him. Do you need to shave or oil your hair? It's so troublesome. What do you see in these black and white things? So these are blood vessels? Oh, this method is very convenient. With this, even if you use a knife, I'm not afraid anymore. After the B ultrasound, do a CT scan. Only then did Greet know that even the ancient tree that sealed Jasmine's father was at the legendary level, at least the energy level was the legendary level. Stand under it, step on a floating disc and slowly rotate it on your feet, and you can naturally perform CT without grabbing Elder Fahim's crutch. The three unicorns stood in a row, watching Gretel flick his fingers to outline a unicorn-shaped light and shadow. The horns are horns, the bones are bones, and the internal organs are internal organs. You can even see clearly how the lump on the shoulder is deeply embedded in the muscles and what blood vessels are involved. So, Elder Fahim narrowed his eyes slightly. Observing patients from this perspective was something he had never experienced before, but the benefits were obvious at a glance. He nodded while thinking about how to learn this spell and which of his own spells he would use in exchange. With this, I can think of a way to cut off the tumor on Phyla's shoulder. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he shook his head, sometimes he raised his eyebrows, sometimes he frowned. After all, Phyla's condition is still not good. I don't know if she can endure the surgery directly. There are also limits to the treatment of natural power. Do you need my help? Gretel whispered beside him. Elder Fahim breathed a sigh of relief and nodded quickly. No problem, no problem. It's best if you are willing to help. He glanced at the unicorns beside him. Are you willing to let him help? The unicorns looked at each other. Phyla neighed slightly and lowered her head. Atef still lowered his head and said, "Thank you, young healer. If you can help cure Fela, our people will be forever grateful for your friendship." Since the other party made a formal request, greed would naturally not push the patient the sick unicorn out. He rolled up his sleeves and worked with Elder Fahim on treatment matters. Open the operating room, hang shadowless lights, and prepare the operating table. The operating table for quadrupeds is different from that for humans. The floating dish is specially shaped so that Phyla can lie on it and then carefully shave the hair around the surgical area. Cut the skin. Cut the subcutaneous tissue. Don't cut it out directly with a knife, separate it little by little along the capsule. Take your time, Elder, use magic to restrain the breath in the cyst, and don't let it leak, let it float and don't fall off. Flotation or other techniques, anything is fine. Thanks to the knight's training, and thanks to Ashmoonsong's transformation training, Gretel felt that his strength had increased a lot during this period, and he could at least cut through the unicorn's skin stably. The scalpel and the surgical instruments turned into the hands of the mage flowed smoothly between his fingers. Skin incision, blood vessel clamping, blunt capsule separation, and treatment to stop bleeding. Cut the diseased muscles, scrape off the blackened periosteum, and remove the diseased bones. Gretel had dissected a unicorn before and probably knew the damage well, so he did not hesitate to start now. Elder Fahim stood by and only had the role of throwing healing spells for him. Within an hour, the black lump was carried out by the floating dish. There was a crash, and the three unicorns gathered around to watch. The one who rushed faster than them was Sarala, who had just returned from playing in the woods for a day. "Gretel, are you treating the unicorn? Why didn't you call me? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @SteelEyeSky for the reward of 100 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 1096. As soon as Sarah rushed over, the unicorns all took a step back. This lady looks like an elf. She has a sense of power, but she doesn't look like an elf at all. It was turbulent, like a mountain or a sea. When it rushed here, it was like a mountain pressing down on it. The unicorns felt that even 3 or 4 of them together would not be a match for her alone. And she was so familiar with the young healer, just now, the two sides almost came to blows. Greet also shrank. Sarala has followed him all the way here, and of course there is friendship, but the Silver Dragon girl's interest in new things should not be underestimated. Especially when treating illnesses and rescuing people, she could never tire of watching all kinds of medical methods. At this moment, treating a new patient, oh, a unicorn, is all done before she comes. That's over. This is even more abominable than robbing her of food. It will take 3 to 5 days of awkwardness and all possible means to coax it away. Fortunately, Gretel is also experienced. No need to turn your eyes, you immediately have something to say. It's not finished yet, it's just the beginning. These are the parts you've seen, and there are some new methods that I can't try until you come here. Real. Sarala was happy. Greet nodded repeatedly. Of course. Now she has only taken care of the trauma on her shoulder. She still has a lot of pain and needs to be treated bit by bit. Miss Phyla, does it hurt here in your upper right abdomen? As he spoke, he raised his head and turned to the young unicorn who had been awakened by the elder and walked out slowly. Phyla nodded slightly and said in a thin voice. Pain. Do you feel stomach discomfort easily after eating? My stomach hurts, it's getting more and more painful these days. Fever, chills, tired easily. The 3 unicorns around him listened silently. Hearing this, you touch me, I touch you, the horns collide with each other and make a crisp sound. 8F raised his voice and said, "Dear healer, how did you know about Philadelphia's condition? Do you know how to treat it?" Even if he didn't ask, Gretel would have to explain it carefully. Now when he asked, he raised his hand and displayed the three-dimensional CT reconstruction and B ultrasound images that he had completed before. He pointed at each one and started talking. "Look here, this is the position of the liver, do you see it? For such a large piece of liver, its shadow should be dense and uniform, but look at this piece, is it different from the surrounding area? It looks particularly uneven, and, a beep. 5 or 6 heads stretched out to look. The unicorns did not dare to speak. Elder Fahim frowned, looked at the book in his hand, looked at it again, and turned it over again. Sarala whispered, "They all look pretty much the same. How can you tell that this is the liver and that is the kidney? The density here is uneven and there are many blood vessels there." It was so dark that it was shaking around, so you couldn't see it at all. She muttered, and Elder Fahim frowned even more. The old man has lived for thousands of years and is a master of healing spells, but this is the first time he has seen these new tricks. Even for a legendary mage, it is really difficult for him to memorize so many things in one breath and use them flexibly. After looking at it for a long time, I still couldn't figure it out, so I sighed and said, "Forget it, I'll use my mental power to check. Phyla, relax and don't resist." He closed his eyes slightly, and his spiritual power penetrated gently, like drizzle or gentle breeze. Phyla stood there and shook, then lowered her head quietly, letting the elders sense it. Greed watched with envy for a while. This is not a doctor-patient relationship. If you ask him to explore, just let him do it quietly without moving. In the previous life, only the highly respected old director of the pediatric department could hold a child with such ease. With one touch and 2 teases, even a crying child can be made quiet for a moment by him. He quickly adjusted the silent phantom. Those things that were suspected to be tumors, those things that looked wrong from B ultrasound and CT scans, were marked up one by one. "Elder, look here again, don't let the duodenum slip past, the bend on this side of the small intestine." He pointed, and Elder Fahim nodded. The mental energy slowly groped from the chest cavity to the abdominal cavity, from the anterior peritoneal wall to the posterior peritoneal wall. After touching it again, he let out a long sigh. Looking around, he looked at the 3 hopeful unicorns and shook his head helplessly. "Philadelphia's situation is very troublesome. Here, here, here." Pointing at the marks on Gretel's silent phantom, he clicked on almost all the marks. Click once, and the unicorns take a breath, click again, and take another breath. After finishing the ordering, the unicorns looked at Gretel in the wrong way. "There's something about this little cub." The gadgets he was tinkering with looked very fancy, and the magic fluctuations were not large. The results were exactly the same as those of Elder Faxahim's investigation. Elder Fahim saw their reactions and remained silent. After giving instructions in one breath, he said slowly, "There is something wrong in these places. I tried to treat it with natural breath, but it grew faster. It was too dangerous to cut it off with a knife." He said and glanced at Gretel. He had read all of Greet's papers day and night these days, and knew that this child was a good knifeman. If it were him, maybe he could do it? The unicorn's eyes quickly moved over. Gretel shook his head slightly. "Phyla's physical condition is not good. It is still a bit risky to operate now and cut off so many places. When I say this, I mean that I am unwilling to reach out." The breathing of several unicorns was a little heavy. Dorsey, who had broken into his laboratory before, took a step forward and was about to make a sound. Gretel changed the subject. "When I dissected Nana's body before, I found some very special cells in her body. If there are also cells in Phyla's body, I have some ideas for treatment. Elder Fahim laughed when he heard this. This little guy, seemingly silent and careless, turns out to be waiting here. Well, it would be better to explain clearly why the unicorn corpse was dissected. Since Gretel is determined, he must help. The old man stroked his long white beard and narrowed his eyes with a smile. So, how do you prove it? It's like this. When I dissected Nana's body before, the normal cells I found were like this. Gretel hooked his fingers and released a patch of light and shadow. One by one, round, oval, oblate, crowded together. Abnormal cells are like this. Two pieces of light and shadow were juxtaposed, and the one behind them looked like it was showing all kinds of irregularities. Greet pointed to the newly cut lump on the floating dish. I will also take a section of this mass. If I can find the same abnormal cells, then the next step will be easy. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, and ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @YGladoHanpi for the 10,000 starting coins reward. Thanks to @ for the 1,500 starting coins. Pi, a new book from a group of friends. Cultivation of Immortality starts from the proficiency panel. The fairy winds and ways are strange, and there are miscellaneous stories about strange things. Behind the legend of ascension as a monk, things have not always been so calm. Zhang Wanyan, who had cultivated for thousands of years, was tragically bewitched when he broke through the last heavenly tribulation, and failed to overcome the tribulation. After his life restarted, he returned to the mortal stage, and everything started from scratch. The proficiency panel accompanies it, and we plan a long life together. The reason why you will fail is entirely because you are not proficient enough. Selling items, upgraded to, brainwashing, driving others to do things for you, and doing some secret bad things / It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 1097. Cell. Cell slice? Is this a magical thing? The confusion of the unicorns can be seen from their long, white-haired faces. Gretel bit the inside of his lip as hard as he could, suppressing his laughter, and threw out 2 papers. About what is a cell and the classification of cells. What do blood cells look like? What do muscle cells, blood vessel cells, skin cells, and bone cells look like? How to observe cells, section, stain, microscopy. He was reluctant to part with the original copy, and he prepared some copies. No, copying copies. He gave one copy to Anari Linji, took out another one, and sent it to the unicorns. As for whether the unicorns could understand it, or even whether the hooves or the unicorn could turn over the paper, Gretel didn't care. The 4 unicorns gathered together, spawning blades of grass, and turned over the papers page by page. Turn a page, look down, finish reading, turn another page. Even though the paper is in 16-inch format, it can only accommodate 2 unicorn heads. After reading a page, you have to move one place to the left and look at other unicorns. The 4 unicorns moved around like a revolving lantern. Even so, they moved carefully to avoid stepping on the paper. Not only did he not dare to step on it, he also did not dare to dig his hooves, fearing that the dust would stain the book, so he deliberately held his breath to prevent his exhalation from wetting the pages. After reading a page, raise your head to the sky and exhale again. After seeing this careful and cautious look, Gretel put away the little anger he had felt before. He squatted in front of them and saw that several unicorns were moaning and the long hairs above their eyes were about to get knotted, so he asked tentatively. Want to explain? Yes. Definitely. Please explain. Several unicorns nodded their heads one after another, and the 4 unicorns went up and down, undulating like joysticks. Gretel laughed and clapped his hands. I'll tell you. Silent Phantom is released. This thing is a ready-made three-dimensional projection, which is better than PPT. Each picture tells a paragraph, and each picture tells a paragraph. After the lecture is finished, go to the microscope. Don't come in. I'll open the secret eyes, and you can just look outside, Gretel warned with fear. After giving instructions, he walked into the mage's cabin and closed the wall tightly. Cut wood chips. Get on the microscope. Cut the meat. Get on the microscope. Take blood. Get on the microscope. Take out the diseased tissue sections of Nana the unicorn and put them on the microscope. Take out the diseased tissue freshly cut from Phyla's body, perform freezing, sectioning, staining, and put it on the microscope. Did you see it? Did you see it? Gretel's voice came happily from the mage's cabin. These are cells, body cells in various locations, blood cells, cells that have become strange. Now we have proven that Phyla also has such strange cells, and the more diseased the area, the more these strange cells are. So your idea is to use your mental power to lock on such strange cells and kill them in a targeted manner. Elder Fahim's voice faintly penetrated the mage's cabin. Is this why you dissected these diseased tissues? Yes. Great stepped out of the mage's cabin with high spirits. If you don't dissect, how do you know where the lesions are? If you don't dissect, how do you know what the cells inside look like? Nana's situation is even more serious. She also has lesions in her brain, and she has a huge tumor. He gestured and brought up ultrasound images, CT images, and anatomical diagrams for everyone to see. The unicorns were silent for a while. Finally, Atef, still the unicorn, emerged from the crowd and lowered his head slightly. Dear healer, we have seen that you did not have any malicious intent in dissecting Nana's body. However, if you have finished the dissection, can you allow us to welcome our sister's body back and let her return to the embrace of the forest? Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. After saying these words, the autopsy incident was revealed. He nodded very solemnly and bowed to the other party. Hold on. Turn around and return to the mage's hut, take out Nana's body and put it down gently. He didn't think about taking possession of the unicorn's body as his own. Apart from taking samples, every part was kept well. Since I have to hand it back now, let's cook it some more. The cut skin of the head and the opened skull were restored one by one. In the cut abdominal cavity, the organs that could be restored were restored as much as possible. Organize, repair. The repair spells are applied one by one. If the spell cannot be repaired, the needles are used to guide the threads. What was lifted out by the floating saucer in the end was a lifeless but basically complete body of a unicorn. The unicorns whined lowly. They formed a circle, raised their horns, and held their companion's body with their noses. Tears welled up in his dark blue and light brown eyes. After mourning for a while, Atef walked to Gretel and lowered his head. Before he spoke, he snorted first with a wet voice. She no longer has the aura of evil. Thank you, young healer. That's not it. I have removed all the tumors and kept them for specimens. Greet bowed his head in return and listened to him again. Please think more about Philadelphia's illness. Unicorns will not treat their friends badly. He bent his knees and shook his body. A long spiral horn quietly emerged from the fur and landed on the ground in front of him. Greet was at a loss and turned to look at Elder Fahim. Hey, it's nothing for you to pay for the consultation, and I can feel confident in accepting the money. But this horn. This is your unicorn's horn. It's the horn on the head of your compatriots. Are you giving this to me as a medical fee? It feels weird, as if you grabbed your companion, snapped off a corner, and used it to pay for my medicine. This is the long horn on the head of a dead unicorn. Seeing his eyes asking for help, Elder Fahim slowly came over, picked up the spiral horn on the ground, and stroked it from the tip to the root. Most of the unicorn's purifying power and lightning power are concentrated in this horn. In the early years, After the unicorn died, the unicorn was buried with it. However, in recent years, the pollution area has become larger and larger, and the purification it's getting harder and harder to get up. Sigh. He let out a long sigh and gave Greet the unicorn. Take it. Whether you use it as magic equipment, analyze its power, or let your silver moon deer slowly absorb it, it will be beneficial. How can a unicorn compare to a living unicorn? Greet held the long horn tightly and nodded deeply. I'm not sure about Philadelphia's disease yet. I still need to think of some methods and do some experiments. Elder, if there are any more symptoms like this, be it wild beasts or monsters, please catch me a few more. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, and ask for all kinds of. Thanks to the Strong Sea Monster for the 5,000 starting coins reward. The cat is going to the exhibition today, and the reward of 10,000 UN will be redeemed tomorrow. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1098. Since Gretel wants to carry out serious research, he can't always use the mage's hut. Put it out in the morning and put it away at night. Before putting it away, all the instruments were collected and stuffed into the space bag. Then you don't look like you're serious about doing research. Seeing that this project was quite big now, Gretel discussed with Elder Fahim and built another laboratory next to it. Ready-made cabins cannot be used, not to mention that there are gaps in the cabins, which will allow wind to blow in and dust to fall off. Even if all the wooden boards can be made to form one, the microorganisms on the wooden boards will still grow as they should. What a great culture medium! A laboratory that cannot pour disinfectant water, irradiate ultraviolet rays, maintain constant temperature and humidity, and maintain a clean and stable environment is not a qualified laboratory. So Greet picked a place a little far away, turned the fossil into mud and turned the mud into stone together, and built a stone house with his bare hands. Fortunately, he is now an 11th level magician, has sufficient magic power, has a meditation core under his control, and has pretty good control over his spell casting. At least it can be horizontal and vertical, the walls are 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground, the four walls are at right angles to each other, and the roof is parallel to the ground, just like a normal house. Thank God, all he wanted to build was something like a cancer cell testing room, with constant temperature, constant humidity, cleanliness, and a place to change clothes. If he really wanted to build a P4 laboratory, Greet could only lay it out on the spot, take out the drawings, and ask the elders to help him do it. The laboratory was built, and Gretel plunged into it at the speed of light. Anatomy, 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 anatomy. Those monsters that escaped from the contaminated area, those beasts that were captured from the contaminated area, went to his operating table one after another. Elder Fahim was walking around, busy in class. However, you can learn sampling, slicing, and dyeing. There is only one thing you cannot learn. Cirella. Freeze. Coming. The silver dragon girl jumped over happily, pursed her lips and blew out a breath. A cold wind passed by, and the tissue in the petri dish instantly turned into a piece of hard ice. Greet took it, started the slicer, and started slicing. Elder Fahim silently cut a similar piece of tissue and raised his hand a little. The level 0 trick, freezing ray, falls with your hand and freezes the tissue into a piece of ice. He glanced at the slicer, raised his hand, and a thin beam of light shot out from his fingertips, slicing across the piece of ice. Once, twice. Slices thinner than a hair, one by one, were poured into the petri dish. The elder held his breath and used the floating technique to carefully float a piece, transfer, dye, and observe. Greet, why can't I still see the cells? You cut it too thickly. Greet gave the answer without looking back. The thickness of tissue frozen sections is required to be controlled at 3 to 5 microns. Although you have cut it very thin, it still won't work if it is less than 1/10 the thickness of a human hair. The elder gasped. Keep experimenting. As expected of a legendary mage, his spiritual power spreads out in every detail. After clicking, and the cut tissue piled up in a basin, the thickness actually required by Greet was actually cut. Then, continue to die and continue to observe. Greet, why can't I still see the cells? Let me see. Gretel came over. I glanced at the eyepiece and immediately smiled. Elder, you are freezing it wrong, the speed is too slow. This requires freezing it to below -80 degrees in a very short moment to prevent the water in the cells from freezing and puncturing the cells. Freezing rays, too weak. Elder Fahim, how to do this? I don't know. Anyway, I just made a request, and Cyrilla did it? Yes, the silver dragon girl nodded proudly. The delicate little chin is almost tilted up to be parallel to the ground. Cyrilla tried many times. It was troublesome. But Cyrilla did it? Yes. Cyrilla is particularly powerful. Gretel stared at the silver dragon girl with admiring eyes. Extraordinary efforts. This is really very difficult. Cyrilla can control it so accurately. It's really amazing. Hey. Elder Fahim turned his head silently. Hey, I'm here to take advantage of the class, not to see you guys compliment each other. He could only practice in secret, and temporarily ask Cyrilla to help him before the training session. The progress on Greet's side has already surged forward, dissecting 20 or 30 beasts in one go. Greet, please cherish their lives a little bit. Elder Fahim twitched with heartache. Although they came from a contaminated area, are they still alive? Can they be saved? Since we are working on this topic, why don't we kill each one on sight? Okay, Elder. In fact, I have almost killed the beast, Greet replied. After dissecting dozens of beasts, he probably already knew. The proportion of animals with deformities in contaminated areas is unusually high. In other words, this deformity has changed the DNA of these animals and has become a stable inheritance. Among deformed animals, the proportion of cancer cells detected is also unusually high. Among the 20 or 30 animals, half of the adult and prime-age animals, not counting young and subadult animals, had cancer cells. So, if we kill cancer cells, maybe we can save their lives a little? A complete cure is impossible. Animals that have been exposed to polluted environments for a long time have significant mutations in their DNA and are prone to cancer. Kill a group of cancer cells, and a new group of cancer cells will appear in the future. However, when the original cancer cells are killed, they change from 1 to 2, and from 2 to 4. The process of division and proliferation will always be interrupted, and it is necessary to start from a new starting point to accumulate orders of magnitude. In this way, the life of the treated person can be slightly extended for a while. Greet picked up a rabbit with fangs. Hey, it is really convenient to have a natural servant to help you. The animals don't need to be raised by him, they don't need to be comforted by him, they don't even need him to cast tranquility spells, they don't need him to shave their fur. Honorary Ling has taken over. Gretel only needed to do a B ultrasound to determine the location of the tumor. Then a long needle is inserted into the abdominal cavity, samples are taken, and biopsies are taken. Well, it is definitely cancer cells. Okay, now, refer to the bacteria and virus killing techniques, use your mental power to target cancer cells, and let's kill them. Greet closed his eyes and focused his mental energy on the cancer cells he had just seen during the microscopic examination. He raised his palm and put it down gently. Elder. Elder. Please use your spiritual power to feel this rabbit, feel its vitality. Okay. Elder Fahim and Honorary Ling spread out their spiritual powers at the same time, locking onto the rabbit. Greet concentrated slightly and mobilized the spell model. Targeted killing of cancer cells. Start up. Weak magic waves rolled over the rabbit's body. The next moment, the elder said, "Hey. Its breath has changed." What happened? Not good. It's dying. Gretel. It seems that there are still many areas for improvement in this targeted killing technique. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Red Comet Mars for the reward of 2000 starting coins. Thanks @ZhengHuayuan is the 100 starting coins I rewarded. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 1099. In the hospital in Gretel's previous life, there were several main ways to kill cancer cells. One is traditional methods, such as surgery, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy. The advantage is that the effect is significant, but the disadvantage is that it is too harmful to the body. Whether it is surgery, radiotherapy, or chemotherapy, after one treatment, only one layer of skin will be peeled off. The second is some more sophisticated methods, such as radiofrequency ablation, embolization of feeding blood vessels, and proton and heavy ion therapy. The advantage is that it is precise, minimally invasive, and effective. The disadvantage is that the coverage is not precise enough and it is easy to miss something. After all, tumors are not necessarily perfectly round. Ablation and proton and heavy ion therapy both emit heat from the center and may miss the corners. Embolization of feeding blood vessels may cause a problem if a blood vessel is missed. Third, there are the latest biomedical methods, such as targeted therapy. The advantage is that the effect is really good and the side effects are really few. The disadvantage? The disadvantage is that targeted drugs are extremely expensive, costing tens of thousands or tens of thousands in medical expenses a month, and drug resistance can develop after a year or two. As for certain types of tumors, there are no corresponding targeted drugs, which is another problem. Greet still knows these basic knowledge, he just hasn't gotten started. He is an emergency doctor, and all these chronic diagnosis tasks are left to his colleagues. Liver cancer is thrown to the hepatobiliary surgery department, breast cancer is thrown to the thyroid and breast surgery department, lung cancer is thrown to the thoracic surgery department, of course, some are also thrown to the internal medicine department, oncology department. Anyway, his own task is just to be careful not to touch the tumor during the operation, and then to call for consultation when it is time to call for consultation, and to issue referrals when it is time to do so. However, as a doctor, he has never thought about dealing with cancer himself. There was no chance before, but now there is a chance. Greet plans to try the fourth type of method. That is to say, mental power locks on cancer cells, covers the patient's whole body, and kills all cancer cells in a targeted manner. I thought, well, but in the past it was fine when used to kill bacteria and viruses. However, once it was used to kill cancer cells, something went terribly wrong. Stop the bleeding! Stop the bleeding! Treatment, Gretel shouted. He shouted the first word, and a green light floated down, caressing the rabbit's body, but Elder Fahim saw that the momentum was not good and quickly took action. In an instant, the rabbit's breathing became heavier, and the waveform on the electrocardiogram also slowed down slightly. It was obvious that the bleeding had been successfully stopped and his vital signs were back up. Greet breathed a sigh of relief and began to think. Why did something go wrong? Why, when a spell goes on, something suddenly goes wrong? The only solution to worries is experimentation. He first picked up the rabbit, then did a B ultrasound, and then a CT scan. Thank God, the elder's treatment does not have the function of hair growth. The shaved rabbit does not need to shave again. Well, the amount of ascites seems to have increased, it's normal. If there was internal bleeding just now, the blood would flow into the abdominal cavity and it should show up as ascites on the B ultrasound. The tumor, the size of the liver has indeed shrunk. Greet called up the images stored in the meditation core, compared them before and after, and nodded. It shows that the targeted killing is still successful. These cells have indeed been killed, however, whether they have been completely killed, a biopsy will be done in a few days to see the results of the sampling, as for now. How about it? Elder Fahim and Cyrilla, one on each side, poked their heads over to take a look. Gretel took a deep breath and shook his head. Wait for me to dissect and see. Anatomy, anatomy. The rabbit was fixed, laparotomy was performed, and one lobe of the liver with tumor was removed. While cutting, he explained to Elder Fahim. Don't rush to remove the internal organs. If you can't get up, it's just a knife. First, you need to free the internal organs with tumors, including many surrounding ligaments, thoracic adhesions, and abdominal adhesions. All of them need to be cut off or bluntly separated. Then we cut the liver, first severing the round ligament of the liver, the falciform ligament, and the left and right triangular ligaments, and then freeing the porta hepatis, including the hepatic artery, hepatic vein, and bile duct, and ligating and cutting them to prevent bleeding from the corresponding parts. It will be reduced a lot. For doctors, any guess, any examination method, X-ray, B ultrasound, CT, MRI, are inferior to simply opening the abdomen for exploration and taking a direct look at the situation. Okay, now we see this piece of liver cyst. Well, that's why he wanted to study it first instead of just treating Philo right away. The beasts used for research can be disemboweled as much as they want, explored as much as they want, and cut into pieces as they want. Treat patients this way? It's impossible. As a doctor, you have to be responsible for your patients and you can't waste the patient's life and health casually. Greet carefully cut off the liver, held it up using a floating technique, and transferred it to the experimental table next to it. As the saying goes, the heart is separated from the belly. Seeing it with your own eyes is indeed different from guessing through the abdominal wall. After targeted killing, the color and shape of the tumor are different from normal tumors. It was soft, like a moldy orange, and water began to drip out. Greet held the tissue tweezers transformed from the mage's hands and touched it lightly, causing the tumor's capsule to crack open on the spot. He touched a syringe and drew out a large tube of liquid. It was red and sticky, and looked like a pot of spoiled soup. Greet took a breath and began to dissect bit by bit. After this dissection, it was discovered that the inside of the cyst was empty, and many cells had either completely shrunk or disappeared. So, what happened to these cells after a shot of targeted killing? He didn't have time to think about this, so he analyzed it piece by piece and dissected it bit by bit. Finally, when the intrahepatic blood vessels and bile ducts were exposed one by one, Greet let out a yet. I see. What's wrong? Did you find the reason? Sirara jumped over to take a look. Elder Fahim and Anari Ling, although not as excited as her, also came over quickly and stood next to Greet. 4 people and 8 eyes fell on the dissected cyst. Look here, the blood vessels and bile ducts are all pitted. This is a sign that cancer cells have invaded the blood vessels and bile ducts. Gretel took a step back to let them see more clearly, and then used the mage's tricks to dye the tissue. The spell I just used killed the cancer cells at once, leaving many holes in the walls of blood vessels and bile ducts. The blood and bile inside leaked out. This rabbit is not going to die. This. Sarala blinked her eyes and nodded, accepting the explanation. Elder Fahim frowned. Why would there be a hole after killing? These, cancer cells were killed, but the bodies are still there, aren't they? Greet also wants to know this question. When he targeted the killing of bacteria and viruses in the past, he had never paid attention to what form the killed bacteria and viruses took, or where they went. Is it immediately removed from the body, like an antidote? Or is it over when the bacteria die and can no longer divide and reproduce, and the genetic chain of the virus collapses and loses activity? These issues are not important in terms of sterilization and poisoning, as long as the disease is cured anyway. However, it is obvious that time cannot be spared. Everything that was not done before must be made up for now. He made 4 smears of the fluid extracted from the cyst, and gave them to Sarala, Elder Fahim, and Miss Linge for observation. Finally, he kept one for himself and put it under the microscope. It's a mess. Sarara couldn't wait to get closer and take a look. He glanced at it and immediately started shouting. "Greet, what are you looking at in such a blur? You can't even see the cells." "Well, you can't see it, it means the cells are dead and dissolved." Greet also stared at his microscope, observing and remembering attentively. "Generally speaking, it's not that fast. From cell death, to cell membrane fragmentation, to cytoplasm overflow, it takes a few hours. However, after being swept by magic, it collapsed immediately. Apparently, magic speeds up the process. The magic swept through, and a large number of cells quickly walked to the step where the cytoplasm overflowed. As a result, the cancer cells blocking the walls of blood vessels and bile ducts disintegrate, and holes in the walls of blood vessels and bile ducts naturally leak out. What should we do?" Sarara frowned, turned her head, and put her head behind Gretel's shoulder to see. Greet stepped aside without haste, made room for her, and showed off the newly prepared tissue slices. "Sarala, freeze." "Et." The silver dragon girl responded happily, pursed her lips and blew. A cold wind blew by, and the tumor tissue froze into ice cubes. Gretel continued slicing, staining, and looking under the microscope. "Well, some cancer cells have not completely disintegrated, although they have been killed, they have not yet reached the stage of cell membrane fragmentation." "Huh? What do you think?" Sarala squeezed forward with all her strength. Greet had no choice but to make way for her, and at the same time used Silent Phantom to outline the image and lecture her. "You see, the cells under the microscope will first shrink, the cell membrane will wrinkle, and small bright spots will form under the microscope. Then, you see here, the cells will become pitted, like an octopus, right? Then, next, is split into cellular fragments. That's it?" Sarara looked up at the image, then looked down at the eyepiece, then looked up at the image, then looked down at the eyepiece. Elder Fahim and Miss Linge stood on both sides, and it was difficult to squeeze in. They could only try to memorize the images first. When Sarara has had enough and loses interest, they will line up to watch again. Alas, I am quite old and still have to queue behind a little silver dragon. It is not easy to learn something. It's even harder to research something. After Greet finished giving a lecture, he squatted next to him and muttered to the incised tumor. "So why do some cells disintegrate so quickly? Is the magic fluctuating too much? Is the output too strong? Or, how should I plug the leaks in the blood vessels? Ah, it's so difficult, there are so many experiments to be done, so many ideas to be verified. Is it possible, give me 48 hours a day. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @1115 for the reward of 1,500 starting coins. Boss, next time I give a reward, if it's convenient, can I just move my finger and give it from the web page? T. Apple will deduct a huge chunk of the reward from Apple, and it will arrive 3 months later. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 1100. Sarala frowned. In the cage in front of me, there were 2 rabbits and a squirrel, all of them were very sick. The silver dragon girl held the spell model given by Gretel, constantly adjusted the spell intensity, and threw it in. Oops. This rabbit is dying. Healing. 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 Oops. It can't work again. Cure serious injuries. Cure fatal injuries. Antidote. Oops. It won't work again. Greet, why is the spell you gave me so difficult? If it doesn't cure it, it'll be fine, but if it does, it will make me die faster. Sarala, don't worry, Gretel hurried over to comfort her. Help me try and see if it's a problem with the spell intensity. Can lowering the spell intensity solve the problem? Well, I'll go see the elder. Elder Fahim and his disciples had sad faces. Gretel generously opened up his own spells to him. Including the directional killing technique, the spell model, every detail, where can be modified, the part that is not written in the paper, and is written in the spell exchange instructions. This spell can be easy or difficult. It's easy to say, a level 8 nature priest can create it, and then it can quickly spread to all his disciples. It is difficult to say that it must be meticulous enough to kill bacteria and viruses, and it must also control the application site. It is not enough to limit the tumor area to the size of a fist, it must be reduced further, and be careful not to touch blood vessels. Even if the old man is a legendary master, if he wants to cast spells with ease after reading it once, he still lacks the skills. The master and the disciple touched their heads, disassembling the spell, disassembling it, studying it, studying it. Oops. Wrong. Oops. Wrong again. The most difficult thing is to target those bacteria and cells. Each one looks similar, but each one looks different. Cruelly, I threw a handful at the rabbit's ears to kill, and the next moment I saw a piece of the rabbit's ears collapsed. Well, don't kill healthy cells. Read this book first. Therefore, before medical students begin to learn various symptoms and various treatments, they must learn many basic subjects. Medical physics, basic chemistry, organic chemistry, histology, biochemistry, pathology. Anyone who has studied histology and embryology and memorized pictures of various cells will have an idea of the differences between various cells. The application is stable and you can kill whatever cells you want without panicking. The problem is that what the old man saw was cell tissue under a light microscope, what Greet memorized were light microscope pictures, electron microscope pictures, and carefully drawn model diagrams summarizing the characteristics of cells. The fundamental difference is that the efficiency of mental power locking is different, and the spell casting effect is definitely different. However, all Greet could throw out were the images of cells he observed under a light microscope, one small circle after another, and the cell nuclei inside could only be dotted with ink. If you want something clearer, wait for the teacher and senior sister to take out the electron microscope first. Seeing the elder's beard and eyebrows knitted together and holding a book, Greet sighed, caught another rabbit, and began to experiment. This time, he was more cautious and his spell casting was more delicate. For larger tumors that may invade blood vessels, kill cancer cells in small pieces and try to avoid hitting blood vessels. Destroy. 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 Rabbits are not big to begin with, and the size of the tumor in the rabbit's liver is even smaller. Greet concentrated her mental power and controlled the range of each spell to a piece the size of a mung bean. Before long, thin beads of sweat broke out on her forehead. It should be almost done, all the surrounding cancer cells have been killed, and only the part connected to the large blood vessels is left. Gretel sighed and braced himself. As soon as the killing spell is thrown, the healing spell is ready, and then pressed on. Then, start the B ultrasound immediately. Well, okay, there's no heavy bleeding this time. He breathed a sigh of relief, put the rabbit back into the cage, and looked at the vital sign monitoring magic hanging next to it. There was no big fluctuation. After thinking about it, I caught another capybara and started practicing from scratch. Shaving, doing B ultrasound, doing CT. The whole process went smoothly. Before treatment could begin, the electrocardiogram and sphygmomanometer on the other side of the rabbit cage screamed like it was struggling. Greet rushed over. On the other side, Elder Fahim also rushed over with his disciples. When he saw it, he said anxiously, "It's dying." "I know it's about to die." Greet stared at the electrocardiogram and blood pressure monitor, his own heartbeat beating faster than the rabbit. Extremely high heart rate, soaring blood pressure, difficulty breathing, vomiting. What exactly are these symptoms? It's in pain. It's unconscious. I can't communicate with it, Annery Ling said anxiously next to her. Gretel frowned tightly, drew a small tube of blood from the rabbit, and took a picture of identify bloodline change. The light of the spell flickered, and messages were fed back quickly one by one. Gretel's mind was spinning. High acidity in the blood should be high uric acid, high potassium, high phosphorus, low calcium. Strange, why is this happening? Unfortunately, creatinine cannot be measured. It would be great if liver function could be measured. Elder Fahim's hand flickered with light, and he applied one healing spell after another. Every time one is thrown, the lines on the electrocardiogram become more regular. After a short pause, he started shaking again, so he could only continue to use healing techniques to stay alive. Oops. Gretel slapped his thigh suddenly. I'm so stupid, I put aside all my hard work in my previous life. This symptom is clearly tumor lysis syndrome. During the treatment of malignant tumors, tumor cells are rapidly dissolved, and the cell contents and their metabolites are rapidly released into the blood. If it cannot be metabolized in a short period of time, a series of complications will occur, with renal insufficiency as the main clinical manifestation. This complication is rare in daily life, but there is another disease whose cause is somewhat similar to it. Rhabdomyolysis is a condition in which a large number of cells die after a large amount of exercise, and the cell contents are excreted into the body and cannot be metabolized. The occurrence of hematuria, acute kidney injury, arrhythmia, and even death is basically the same as tumor lysis syndrome. He rushed forward and opened the rabbit cage. He didn't even have time to take out the rabbit, squeezed out a handful of glycerin and rubbed it on its belly. The rabbit was groggy and wouldn't kick or bite, so he obediently let him have a B ultrasound. Bladder, kidneys, no urine. Come on, renal insufficiency is basically a real problem. Gretel took a breath and turned to Elder Fahim. Antitoxicity. What kind of poison? Elder Fahim was confused. This rabbit has not eaten a sip of food or drank a sip of water since receiving treatment. Even the wind blowing from the laboratory is clean. Where is the poison? While he was at a loss, he still followed Greet's instructions and performed an antidote. The light flashed and the rabbit lay there, no better or worse. The electrocardiogram is trembling and starting to fail again. Obviously, in the elder's understanding, blood potassium, blood phosphorus, urea, creatinine, etc. are not considered toxins, the body itself does not recognize them as toxins. Neither party had this understanding. As the detoxification technique continued, there was naturally no movement. It seems that I need to give the elders additional physiology and biochemistry lessons. Gretel took a deep breath and concentrated slightly. He was not very confident in his control, so he decided to play it safe and clean up those things that wouldn't be a problem if he killed them first. Antitoxicity. Clean up urea, clean up creatinine. Then, do a quick mental calculation, consider how much blood potassium and blood phosphorus need to be removed, and then cast a detoxification spell. Then, he turned around and prepared a tube of calcium chloride solution. Carefully, he pushed a little bit into the rabbit's veins. Elder, healing skills. Focus on treating the kidneys. Such a wave of rescue efforts finally brought the rabbit back from the brink of death. Elder Fahim breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Greet up and down with strange eyes. Why can you bring it back like this? Gretel, what kind of poison does this detoxification technique remove? To explain this, we have to go through medical biology and biochemistry. Greet really doesn't have the energy to teach this course. He thought for a while and decided to choose a simpler explanation. Elder, this tumor in the rabbit's body is caused by the influence of the polluted area. It is not a good thing. It kills the cells and the dirt in the cells flows into the rabbit's body, and the rabbit cannot bear it. That's true. Elder Fahim accepted this explanation naturally and nodded while stroking his beard. Gretel beats the snake with the stick. Is there any way to remove all these things after killing the cells? Just like the cleaning technique, clean them completely. The cleaning technique doesn't work. The elder shook his head naturally. The cleaning technique cannot remove the contents through the skin, unless you have a cesarean section first. I think if you are willing to have a cesarean section, you won't want to use these magics, right? Greet nodded vigorously. The elder nodded, shook his head, nodded again, shook his head again, and went through the spells he had learned in his life one by one in his heart. Before she could speak, Cyrilla had already poked her head over. How about petrification? What? The two asked together. Cyrilla gestured confidently. Petrify the person first. After petrifying the person, then open a hole and take out the bad things. Wouldn't it prevent them from leaking everywhere? Elder Fahim. Anari Lingi. As expected of a silver dragon, this idea is simply unbridled. Is it true that only people who have never systematically learned magic can have such strange ideas? Greet, this is a path I never imagined. However, Cyrilla, this is not how petrification is used. After it is petrified, drilling holes in it will damage human tissue. It is very difficult to treat. If you are not careful, you will turn the stone statue into stone broken. That's it? Cyrilla was frustrated. Gretel patted the back of her hand and turned his gaze to Elder Fahim. Let's think of another way, Elder. Is there any way to make a membrane that allows some substances to pass through and some substances not to pass through? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to Echui Yun Tianqian for the 100 starting coins. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jiolan 2020. Chapter 1101. Tumor lysis syndrome. A large number of necrotic cells burst on the spot, and the cytoplasm was discharged into the body, increasing the load on the kidneys and leading to renal failure. In this case, Gretel hardly had to use his brain. There is a treatment that perfectly suits the symptom. Come for dialysis. Acute renal failure, come to dialysis. Chronic renal failure, get dialysis. Acute drug poisoning, poisoning, in short, just get dialysis. The other name of hemodialysis is artificial kidney. Originally, this artificial kidney is used to carry out everything for the real kidney. Of course, dialysis machines are not that easy to make. Semi-permeable membranes, dialysates, blood pumps, heparin pumps, and various control and monitoring equipment all have major hurdles to overcome. Of course, Gretel didn't expect that he could pass all the hurdles by hand. Just a semi-permeable membrane can kill him. However, isn't Elder Fahim still there? What a legend! A natural legend. He has been through a long period of time, he is well informed, he has been stationed in the fertile forest for many, many years, and he has an extraordinary understanding of the rich species in the rainforest, an elf legend. If in this world, making biological semi-permeable membranes belongs to the profession of biological alchemy, then Elder Fasim would probably be an academician-level figure. Apart from, what is a semi-permeable membrane? Well, Greet scratched his head, Greet was confused, Greet hesitated. A semi-permeable membrane is a membrane that allows only certain molecules and ions to diffuse in and out. Generally speaking, semi-permeable membranes only allow ions and small molecular substances to pass through, while biological macromolecules cannot freely pass through the semi-permeable membrane. The semi-permeable membrane used in the hemodialysis machine only allows small molecules and some medium molecular substances with a molecular weight of less than 15,000 to pass through, while macromolecular substances with a molecular weight greater than 35,000 cannot pass through. Therefore, proteins, bacteria, viruses, blood cells, these things cannot be separated out through the semi-permeable membrane. Great. Let's first explain to Elder Fahim what a molecule is and what molecular weight is. It's just a membrane, or a filter. Big things can't get through, only small things can. How big? How small? This. Greet felt from the bottom of his heart that the city's 9-year compulsory education, or 12-year basic education, is really very useful. A person who has completed high school can basically understand what a semi-permeable membrane is without any effort. But here, even if Elder Fahim is a legendary master, if he wants to explain it, he has to rack his brains and start from the most basic concepts. He flipped through the papers, starting from atoms, to molecules, to ions. From the smallest potassium ions, sodium ions, calcium ions, to large molecules, such as proteins. Oh, what other concentration, osmotic pressure, etc., must be explained clearly. Fortunately, as a former emergency room doctor, I have an eloquent tongue and can explain the causes and treatment methods to patients and their families who have not received complete basic education. This is a basic skill. He explained, drew pictures, and used all kinds of analogies from over-fertilizing a plant, which burns its roots, to how your hands will wrinkle if you soak them for too long. As he talked, Elder Fahim's brows relaxed little by little. So that's it? Isn't this the root of the plant? It absorbs water from the soil, absorbs what you said, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, various things, and passes them from the roots to the trunk, and then from the trunk to the branches and leaves. Greet nodded vigorously. That's right, the epidermis of plant roots is equivalent to a semi-permeable membrane. Using the concentration difference of the solutions on both sides, water is drawn into the plants. Elder, it's great that you understand. In that case, I'll discuss it with the plants. Let me think about who to talk to. Gretel watched helplessly as Elder Fahim stood up and left, swaying 3 times and walked out of the laboratory. Wait, Elder Fahim, you want to consult with a plant, what does that mean? Do you want plants, even magic plants, to evolve on the spot and create a semi-permeable membrane for you? Greet was also very curious about how a legendary master of the natural system would use to achieve this goal, so he couldn't help but chase after him. Without saying a word, he followed behind and watched. Elder Fahim walked not too fast, but not too slowly either. He stopped for a while and touched the grass on the ground. Then he turned around and touched a bush next to the shade of a tree. Nodding, shaking his head, nodding again, shaking his head again, before he knew it, he was walking deep into the jungle. Greet followed behind with one kick high and one low. Elder Fahim's walking speed seemed unpleasant, and he was still stopping and starting. However, he only followed for less than half an hour before he was out of breath and his footsteps became heavier and heavier. Seeing that the elder had no intention of stopping, he suddenly turned into a black bear and ran up. Hey, luckily I learned the transformation technique from Ash Moon Song, and walking in the forest in the form of a bear is much more convenient. Elder Fahim turned around, turned around. Hold down a tree, lower your head, meditate, and shake your head, grab a vine, lower your head, meditate, and shake your head again. Seeing Gretel catch up, he smiled and waved to him. Greet, you really gave me a problem. These plants that can grow semi-permeable membranes are either too big to move away, they are too small. Their filtration ability is too poor and their speed is too slow. Oh, trouble. Gretel, snoring, snoring, snoring. If you bring up this topic, I will. We have no common language with you. Oh, your transformation technique still can't maintain animal form and talk at the same time? This is not good, this will cause big trouble. Gretel, snoring, uh-huh. Uh-huh. Speaking of which, there was once an elf who wanted to find an animal companion, so she went to the forest to look for it. She saw a black bear, which was tall and had moist hair. She thought it was very much in line with her idea, so she jumped up and rode on the bear's back. Want to tame it? At this point, I laughed out loud. Gretel looked at him inexplicably. Hululu. Ah, this is a joke that has been circulating among elves for a long time. You haven't heard it? In fact, the black bear is a nature servant and is turning into a bear and wandering in the forest. Gretel. Elder, I always feel that what you are talking about is not suitable for young people to listen to. He simply changed back to his human form and walked to the elder. Standing on tiptoes, he looked around. Elder, if you want to find plants that meet the requirements, why not go to the pond to find them? I remember that when Nevis was going to do a drinking water purification project, the people from the nature order spawned a group of aquatic plants. There it has strong filtration and purification capabilities. Isn't this what you are looking for? 2 hours later, Greet controlled a huge floating saucer, more like a lotus tank than a floating saucer, staggering and walking beside Elder Fahim. The floating saucer contained half a tank of mud and half a tank of water. There were 2 cattails, a water lily, and some plants that he didn't quite recognize. Elder Fahim has communicated with each other and determined that it is generally suitable and can be used to try hemodialysis. Greet, you can't do this. Elder Fahim looked at Greet with a look that hates iron and steel. Can't you cast spells in bear form? This control is too weak. You must at least have the ability to cast spells. As a last resort, if you carry your teammates on your back and rush out of the encirclement, you must at least have the ability to throw healing spells while running and support yourself at the same time. Barrier ability. Gretel's answer was to summon a phantom pony and mount his horse. Elder, I know, I will practice in the future. He groaned with a grimace. In the future, in the future. You see, I am a healer. I have so many things to study. The aquatic plants swayed and followed Greet to the laboratory. Under Greet's expectant gaze, a cattail sprouted and grew leaves, and a green stem stood out, reaching to the edge of the experimental animal's cage. Here, try it out. The elder opened his mouth to give instructions. Gretel was stunned. How to use? Just use this tender stem. Insert it in and see if it can filter. No, elder, wait a minute, where is the dialysate? I haven't prepared the dialysate yet. Let the dialysate come. Let's try it first. Gretel tried his best to turn his head, which spawned 2 vines, which were connected to the puncture needle. One pierced the artery, and the other end of the vine swayed, and the tender stem of the cattail immediately opened a slit and grew together with it. The other root grows together with the other end of the cattail stem, waiting for the blood to filter out and flow into the rabbit's veins. An old man, a young man, plus Sarala and Linji, surrounded the rabbit and looked at it eagerly. No blood cells can't flow through. Elder, the micropores inside the stem must be larger. Elder Fahim shook his head and reached out to touch the cattails. A flash of green light flashed, and the cattails seemed to change or not, but bright red did appear in the vines leading to the veins. No, it can't absorb the things you want. This time, Elder Fahim shook his head on his own. He touched the cattail again, and a green light flashed. The young stem of the cattail suddenly became thicker, and liquid began to flow inside. No, the blood has begun to coagulate. Elder, can this cattail be treated with anticoagulation spells? I don't know. Then I'll try one first. Cattails, dialysis, failure. Water lilies, dialysis, failure. Duckweed, dialysis, failure. Water hyacinth, dialysis, failure. No, these plants are too weak. After trying all the aquatic plants he could think of, Elder Fahim sat on the ground in frustration, his white beard dripping wet. Plants that are too weak cannot communicate with me well and cannot bear too many changes. I need stronger plants, I need high-level magic plants. Then, Elder Greet silently raised the oak staff in his hand. Can I use it? You are too weak. Elder Fahim only glanced at it and turned away. It's too late today, and I'm tired of all the trouble. Get up early tomorrow, and I'll discuss it with Gushu. The next morning, Gretel stared dumbfoundedly as the ancient tree shook its branches, sprouted a green twig, and inserted it into the rabbit's abdomen. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 1102. Use ancient trees to make biological dialysis machines. This idea was something Gretel had never imagined. The medical devices Greet had seen before were all made of metal, glass, silicone, rubber. In short, they had a smooth surface, could withstand high temperatures, and could be sterilized. Even if it is a disposable medical device, it must be sterilized first, right? And now, an ancient tree. The branch was hung down, followed by the abdominal incision made by Greet, and inserted directly into the patient's body. Greet stood there, raising his head, looking at the big tree that only took dozens of people to hug him, with a crown area of hundreds of square meters, and felt that it was a bit, to treat it as a medical device. Break defense. Even if the twig has just grown, just like the vine that Gretel has spawned, infection has been prevented to the greatest extent. But this is a big tree. A big tree with roots in the ground, leaves growing in spring, blooming in summer, and bearing fruits in autumn and falling leaves in winter. Elder, how did you do it? Directly let the tree act as a dialysis machine. I originally asked you to discuss which plant to grow, a tube or a film. I didn't want you to let it grow a tube or a film. An ancient tree died in person. Wait, he finally reacted and stretched out his hand to stop. Anticoagulate. Control the flow rate. Monitor the arterial and venous pressure difference. My dialysate has not been prepared yet. Why do you need dialysate? The elder turned to look at him with a calm expression on his face. Didn't you say that you need to suck out the bad things? I've already told the ancient tree to let the ancient tree absorb these things. Wouldn't that be fine? Yes. Sarala also poked her head over. He looked up, looked down, and pulled Gretel. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Why not stretch a vine in, wrap the tumor, and simply suck the thing out? As long as the broken thing can be sucked out, wouldn't it be able to poison people? This is also a way. In fact, this is also one of the alternatives planned by Greet. If you are treating a single tumor, such as a single liver cancer tumor, then using vines is much more convenient. A vine can be extended in to suck out the disintegrated cancer cells. It is indeed a high-quality and low-cost solution, which is much more convenient than dealing with dialysis. What? Can't suck it clean? If the suction is not clean, you can open the head of the vine to wrap the tumor, and use a negative pressure suction device to slowly aspirate. Before he finished speaking, the rabbit in front of him suddenly twitched. Elder Fahim quickly threw down 7 or 8 healing spells, and finally brought the rabbit's vital signs back. He breathed a sigh of relief, touched the branches in front of him, frowned and said, "Your method is not good." It was revealed in one go. Braked. Greet turned around. His plan is feasible, but if it is exposed, it must be because the ancient tree has hairy branches and leaves. No, it has hairy branches and leaves. He caught a rabbit again, completed the B ultrasound and CT scan, picked up a seed on his fingertips, and spawned a vine. To wrap the tumor, you don't have to rush it into the abdominal cavity all at once, you have to take your time and get closer bit by bit. Look. The secret eye was entangled with vines, and it penetrated bit by bit from the entrance to Greet's abdominal cavity. The vines are intricately connected and expand outward, opening up a small world in the rabbit's abdomen. During the observation with the secret eye screen, the front ends of the vines separated, like countless slender fingers, parting the peritoneum one by one, parting the omentum hanging the intestines, parting the ligaments, and parting the outer capsule of the liver. Then, use blunt dissection bit by bit, pinch the blood vessels and bile ducts outside the liver, cut them off one by one, and use the secret eye to guide and throw in the healing technique. Separate the capsule surrounding the tumor from the surrounding normal tissue and wrap it around. It's so slow. Elder Fahim let out a long sigh. Behind him, Lin Ge was holding a notebook, writing and drawing, and kept recording. There are so many things to do, such a small tumor costs a lot. She turned and looked out the window. Half an hour. Sister, half an hour is already very fast. Greet concentrated on controlling the movement of the vines to the most delicate level, with a thin layer of sweat on his forehead. If you find a doctor, a surgeon from a tertiary hospital with the best skills and the most proficient skills, he can use laparoscopy to remove the tumor. Can he cut it out for you in half an hour? It took half an hour to touch the liver, okay. This means that the vine is softer than the laparoscope and much easier to maneuver than the laparoscope. It only took him half an hour to isolate the tumor. Gretel didn't argue. As for the speed of operation, I have done it once, so I naturally know how fast it can be done. He controlled the thickest vine, opened his head forward, swallowed the tumor in one gulp, and raised his hand to cast a spell. Mental power targets the tumor, and the targeted killing of cancer cells is activated, with the greatest impact. Superior. The power felt by the vines feeds back to the fingertips. After swallowing the tumor, the vines were still solid at first, trying hard to support the weight of the tumor, but soon became soft and collapsed inside. Soft and flowing out along the hollow vines. All right. After pulling out the vine and pouring the liquid inside into a test tube, Greet finally relaxed and sat aside. He rubbed his forehead and leaned back with a sigh. Finally done. He is now a level 11 magician. He can manipulate the vines for half an hour, which is not too much of a burden on his mental strength. However, after half an hour of full concentration and not making any mistakes, I am still very nervous and need to relax. This is just a tumor, and it takes so long. If you encounter multiple tumors, or lymphoma that spreads throughout the body, it will be too tiring to suck them one by one with the vine. The important thing is that dialysis is widely used. Not only for tumor treatment, but also for other conditions, such as kidney failure, liver failure, poisoning, and many other symptoms. While Elder Fahim is here, we must try his best to reserve this technology. Elder Fahim's face was solemn. The difference between Gretel's delicate operation and the rough thrust of the ancient tree branches was obvious. Let him learn the anatomy of the human body, and then teach the ancient tree, or control the ancient tree. It feels like you can't learn it in a day or two. In comparison, it seems that the dialysis that Greet mentioned is more convenient. By the way, how do you prepare the dialysate you mentioned? Greet gave him a desperate look. Dialysate, how could he prepare such things as dialysate? Today's dialysates are readily available in hospitals and are supplied regularly by specialized suppliers. When needed, just pick it up and add it to the dialysis machine and run it by itself. Ask him how to match it. He is not a nephrologist, he is not a hemodialysis unit, he is not even a general internal medicine. Ask him how to match. He has to recall the ion content of normal blood, and calculate it slowly. Forget it, I'll think of a solution. Elder Fahim was silent for a while, then turned around and called to his disciple. Anari, go and catch 2 normal rabbits. Okay. Linji rushed out. She was busy catching rabbits, and Gretel was busy taking notes and writing papers. By the way, the tumor cell fluid extracted from the tube should also be photographed to identify the bloodline and analyze its composition. Well, about the treatment of cancer cells, the Vine version, I can already write a separate paper. I just don't know where to publish it now that I have finished it. Elder Fahim, is there any channel to send papers to Nevis? Or, send a little bird directly to the land of eagles? This is the nearest way. While writing, he quietly glanced at Elder Fahim. In other words, he has no idea how to prepare dialysate. What can the elders do? Anari Ling is also a level 16 nature walker. The speed at which he catches a few rabbits only depends on how close the surrounding rabbits are. There is absolutely no problem of missing. Greet had just finished writing the summary and outline when she picked up 2 rabbits and opened the door and came in. Teacher. Got it? Okay. Get some blood from them. The elder handed over 2 test tubes. Anari Linji raised his hand and the rabbit blood immediately gurgled down and was injected into the test tubes. The elder took the test tube back, and under Gretel's shocked eyes, handed it to the young branch of the ancient tree. Come on, taste it, remember the taste, remember the proportions of various components in the blood. Absorb all the excess. Gretel. What? Let the ancient tree taste rabbit blood? Let ancient trees remember various ingredients? Elder, you are amazing. Emerald green twigs plunged into the test tube. The efficiency of the tall and majestic ancient tree in this regard is even much higher than that of the vampire vine. Amidst the gurgling sound, 1 test tube bottomed out, and another test tube bottomed out. Greet, that tumor cell fluid you extracted? Let them taste it? Greet silently handed over the test tube. While handing it over, he cursed. Can you really taste this ancient tree? Really? Wait, whether it can do it or not, I can teach it. He quickly cut open the rabbit's abdominal cavity. Take half a test tube of blood from the renal artery, and then take half a test tube of blood from the renal vein and send it to the elder. Elder, let the ancient tree taste this. This is the blood before it is input into the kidneys, and this is the blood after the kidneys have filtered it. Let the ancient tree remember that after the kidneys filter it, the components that disappear are what it needs to filter of. Elder Fahim glanced at Greet, took the test tube, and touched the branches of the ancient tree with one hand. His eyes were slightly closed, and the branches were trembling, just like a person and a tree starting to have a quiet conversation. Soon, the green branches of the ancient tree took turns to reach into the 2 test tubes and drink the blood inside. It said it remembered it. Elder Fahim said softly, what else? And, the contents of various ions. Elder, please wait a moment while I prepare the solution. Greet rushed to the experimental table, and not long after, he came over with a bunch of test tubes. Then, this is potassium chloride solution, this is sodium chloride solution, this is calcium chloride solution. The smell of various ions reminded him that if it is thicker than this, it must absorb some ions, adjust the concentration to normal. It said it remembered it and could do it. So, try again. The nth rabbit became the victim. This time, under Gretel's shocked eyes. Dialysis was successful. Elder, you actually taught the ancient tree to do dialysis. Can you teach me my oak staff? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1103. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. Gretel ran from east to west and from west to east under the shade of the old trees. First, he ran back and forth, then he ran in circles, 1 lap of 400 meters, 2 laps of 800 meters. I started running in human form, but when I couldn't run anymore, I switched to bear form and ran. Behind him, an oak stick, or rather, a small oak tree, opened up a few tree roots and kept chasing after him. Swing the branch, pump it horizontally and vertically. From time to time, he would shoot a leaf and make a whizzing dart. Elder Fahim stood in front of the laboratory door, stroking his white beard and looking at it with a smile. Beside him, Anari Ling followed the oak staff with his eyes and couldn't help laughing. Greet's oak staff is so lively. Yes, it's really very energetic. Elder Fahim's mouth raised, then flattened, then raised again, then flattened. With such an oak staff, after he advances a few more times, it will be effortless to transform him into a tree man. Look, he can actually hit people with tree roots. I told you not to hit me. Gretel suddenly stopped, changed back into human form, and put on a set of defenses for himself. Pointing at the oak staff, angrily. That's almost it? Just hit it twice to vent your anger. How many times do you need to hit me? Don't think I can't beat you. The oak staff jumped up and struck. Several tree roots stretched out at the same time, supporting the ground and turning the oak staff from straight to horizontal. The branches converged and turned into a spear, thrust forward with all their strength. Gretel dodged left and right. Et. Still missed. Ouch. Here Greet turns to the left, turns to the right, jumps left, jumps right, avoiding the thrust of the oak staff. On the other side, several tree roots of the oak stick were held flat and thrust forward. Unexpectedly, a tree root was lifted up, giving Gretel a kick. Fortunately, Gretel's defense was fully charged, so the tree root swept Tang's leg and made a loud bang on the high mage's armor. He was hit so hard that he took a step to the left, suddenly transformed into a black bear, and rushed over with a roar. Ouch! Relying on the strong defensive power of the bear form, he stood up against the blows from branches and roots, raised his palms and slapped hard. Slap the oak stick on the ground, lie up, press the branches with your front paws, and press the roots with your back paws. My name is Kincheo. I call you Kincheo. This kind of fight between the master and the staff is really rare to see. Anari Ling covered her lips and laughed so hard that her branches trembled. Sarala was already laughing so much that she squatted down, hugged her belly, and wiped away tears. Ha 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 ha, Gretel. Work harder. Hit him. Even the elf spellcaster Delalosha, who came to deliver the experimental animals and stopped by the elder for a meal, could not maintain his usual cold face, and the corners of his mouth trembled slightly. Only Elder Fahim's focus was not on Gretel's fight with the oak staff. The old man's eyes lit up, and he tightened his fingers on his white beard, almost tearing off a beard. Teacher, what's wrong? Look, I taught him the art of transfiguration before, and he couldn't learn it while maintaining his bear form and talking at the same time. Now he can learn it after a fight with an oak staff. Yes, Anari Linji laughed and sighed again. Seeing Greet muttering and arguing with the oak staff, he shook his head and said, "Would you like to strengthen that oak staff? If we fight him again, maybe he will learn to transform and cast spells." No need for now, the elder smiled and shook his head. Greet's stay here will not be short, and there will be plenty of opportunities to teach him slowly. Apart from anything else, he still has no clue about Jasmine's father's illness. He must be cured before he can leave. Greet and the oak staff rolled around for a long time before returning to their human form and returning to Elder Fahim with the oak staff in hand. After this beating, the oak staff finally behaved, retracted its branches and roots, and returned to its eyebrow-level staff form. Gretel held up the oak staff and frowned. "Elder, I can't teach this guy well. Please teach him." "Can't you teach him well?" "I think this kid is pretty good." Elder Fahim smiled and shook his head. "On the other hand, you really don't have a master. You teach your own oak staff, why do you push it on others? Didn't your teacher teach you? Legendary master, you shouldn't even understand this." "Well." Gretel was completely embarrassed to say that although my teacher was a legend, he was a teacher in the direction of magic. Elder Erwin, the natural priest, is currently at level 9, which is already lower than me. He could only bow his head honestly. When I was in the first level, I went to Nevis, which is the city of mages. Later, I learned a lot of things piecemeal, and I didn't follow the teacher all the time." "That's okay." Elder Fahim sighed. "This child is smart, but it is a pity that he has not been taught well. Even if he is taught well, it is of little use. Human beings are not as close to nature as elves. Now that Gretel is with him, he must learn the relevant lessons about elf cubs all over again. Since you use the oak staff as a protective weapon, you need to communicate with it more. What do you know, what do you know, what did you learn today? Meditate with it, and tell it everything." "But I don't know how to let it learn dialysis." Gretel frowned. "Look at Elder Fahim, look at his oak staff, and then look at the ancient tree not far away. Elder, if it still doesn't work, can you let Gushu teach it?" "You have to learn it." Elder Fahim shook his head and did not answer, but pointed at the ancient tree. "Go, communicate with it yourself, ask it what it wants to do, and whether it can initiate communication between trees. Of course, it is best for you to learn it yourself. When you go to other places in the future, you can teach other plants by yourself. Do you still want to carry the ancient tree with you?" "Well." Gretel held the oak staff in his arms, lowered his head and stepped in front of the ancient tree. One hand grasped the oak staff and stood it on the ground, with the head of the staff leaning against the trunk. The other hand was stretched out and the palm of the hand was pressed against the ancient tree. "Help me." He quietly sank into meditation, communicating with the ancient trees and the oak staff. The breeze blew through the forest, the ancient branches and leaves rustled, and the oak staff stood upright silently. The roots of the tree penetrated deeply into the soil, and were connected with the ancient trees underground. Between the ancient trees and the young oaks, information is quietly exchanged and communicated. As for what they communicated, Gretel was limited to levels and could not fully analyze it yet. He clutched the oak staff and kept recalling. In the human body, what are the normal components in the blood, what metabolic components will be produced? Which components should be filtered out by the kidneys? If the kidneys are damaged, or a large amount of poisons cannot be metabolized by the kidneys, they should be filtered out by an artificial dialysis machine. Which ingredients are normal, but if there are too many, some need to be absorbed quickly. A large amount of knowledge is constantly retrieved from memory, flowing in meditation, trying to pass it on to the ancient tree, and by the way, asking the ancient tree to pass it on to the oak staff. As for this knowledge, whether the ancient tree can understand it, whether it can be remembered, whether it can be passed on, and whether the oak staff can master it, Greet has no idea at all, and basically resigns himself to the rhythm of fate. One person, one tree, and one staff stood silently, as if Gretel himself had become a tree, standing in the forest and accepting the wind and rain. Elder Fahim stared at him from a distance and sighed longly. Well, the child's qualifications are really good, but the education he received before was really not good. Forget it, if he works harder, just treat it as having one more disciple and teach him slowly. Gretel and Gushu meditated together for a short while before opening their eyes and getting up. He left the oak stick under the shade of the ancient tree, allowing the two plants to coax each other, and returned to work. Elder, let's continue the experiment. This time, try to treat all tumors at the same time and see if dialysis can hold up. 2 rabbits were caught. A capybara was captured. A squirrel was caught. A deer was caught. The branches of the ancient tree reach out into the bodies of animals undergoing treatment for cancer. Greet mobilized his mental power to sweep the cancer cell-directed killing technique all over the animal's body from top to bottom. The green branches of the ancient trees extend into the animal's blood vessels, trying to absorb the debris after the cells have disintegrated. Greet and Elder Fahim, one on each side, paid attention to the aura of the animals, tried their best to throw healing spells, and hung up the vital signs of the animals under test. The first rabbit was thrilling. The second rabbit's vital signs were up and down, constantly fluctuating. After a round of dialysis and several treatments, he was finally almost healed. Capybara, squirrel, deer. It seems that this treatment plan is almost enough. After 5 or 6 consecutive beasts were treated alive, the elder breathed a sigh of relief and his face improved a lot. Now that I think about it, many elven warriors will develop symptoms similar to those of animals after entering or being close to the secret realm for a long time. Gretel, if you are sure, can you call them over for treatment? Don't worry yet. Gretel was dizzy and his temples were twitching. After a day of high-intensity spell casting, he was unable to even speak. In the next stage, let's try it with Warcraft. Once it's cured, treat the unicorn. The unicorn will definitely be cured, and then treat someone else, leveled Warcraft, and ordinary beasts. After treatment, it will always be. Will it be different? It's obviously different, and it's quite different. For those low-level monsters of level 1, 2, 3, and 5, Gretel's mental power penetrated them and swept away the cancer cells in their bodies with ease, just like treating ordinary beasts. However, when a majestic and heavy-footed tiger walked up to him and slowly lay down, Gretel felt bad. Elder, I can't cure it. How to say? My mental power can't penetrate into its body at all. Gretel's whole body was feeling bad. It's too strong. What level is it? According to your classification, it's probably level 16. Anari Ling touched the tiger's head and combed its fur. It can't penetrate at all? If it can't penetrate, it can't be cured. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to the Strong Sea Monster for the 5,000 starting coins reward.